control for your phone, which is *9. That will act as the hand raising function for your phone. And you can also lower your hand if your question has been addressed or after we have answered your question, please lower your hand. And finally, the same information available in Spanish. We want to make sure that it's available visibly here so that you can get this information through our interpreters. Give that a moment here. And with that, we will hand it over to the city to give us our official welcome.
All right, can I have the next slide, please? Oh, JC, did you want to continue?
Sure, I'm sorry, just one more detail. This is important. I mentioned the polling. We want to add that in because throughout the presentation, our team will be launching a series of polling questions. Again, participation is highly encouraged. We need that feedback. To respond to the polling questions, select the on-screen answers that best represent your responses, and we'll do a bit of a practice run here. Please respond to as many of the polling questions as possible. And thank you once again for your participation. And I will go ahead and cover this to stay connected. Visit the project website. There are maps, there are previous meetings, there are FAQs. Here's the website information once again. It's www.riversideca.gov/housing update. Use the online policy feedback tool here as well. There's a survey. The address is displayed here on screen. And you can ask your questions for direct response from Matthew Taylor. His email address is shown here, mtaylor@riversideca.gov. And please stay tuned to watch for future public meetings. Next slide. And now I will officially hand it over. Thank you, Matthew.
All right. Thanks again, JC. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. If you've not met me before, my name is Matthew Taylor. I'm a planner with the City of Riverside Community and Economic Development Department. I'm also the project manager for the Phase 1 General Plan Update, which is the housing element update, the public safety element update, and the development of environmental justice policies. That is the entire project. I'll explain a little bit more about what that means in a few minutes. But first tonight, this workshop is intended to be focused on policies developed specifically for our public safety element, as well as policies that we have developed to address environmental justice, both of which are core components of this project. We are also developing policies related to housing. We are having a follow-up meeting next week on June 17th, in the evening of June 17th. Same time, same format to focus on the housing related policies. So if you have an interest in that, we would encourage you to join us again next week for that. For tonight, the agenda that you see on your screen here, I'm going to provide a little bit of an introduction and a background of the project, as well as give you a kind of a preview of the things that we'll be discussing. From there, we will move into a review of our draft environmental justice policies. We will then break for a Q&A on those environmental justice policies to give you an opportunity to ask us questions, make comments, and we'll address comments that are either made verbally or through the Q&A function. After that, we will move on to the public safety element and the draft policies that we have developed for that document. And we'll present each of those policies as well as some examples of things that can be related to those policies. And then we will break for another Q&A session where we can have a little bit more of an open discussion about the public safety element. And then after that, we will wrap up. So without further ado, I think we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so first, let's take a big step back and talk about what the general plan is. So the general plan is the city's long-term roadmap for the physical growth and development of the city over a long planning horizon. The Riverside's current general plan was adopted in 2007, and runs through about 2025. We are in the process of starting a comprehensive update of that general plan, to extend that planning horizon out several decades. As you know, 2025 is coming up rather quickly here. And so we're doing this in 2 phases. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, but in general, the general plan it contains policies and objectives for a number of broad topic areas. Covers everything from housing to land use, transportation, public services. Riverside's general plan includes historic preservation. It includes air quality and a number of other things that are related in some way to the future development of our city. And then each of these elements, you'll hear the word element a lot. Element is just kind of another word for chapter. It establishes objectives that kind of guide city decision making to help us achieve our goals over the long term. Next slide, please. So phase 1 of our general plan update consists of the housing element, the public safety element, and our environmental justice policies. Phase 1 is being driven by the housing element because the updating the housing element is something that we need to complete by a specified point in time per state law. That deadline is October 15th of this year. So we've spent a lot of time working on the housing portion of this, but when we update the housing element, we're also required to update our public safety element. So the public safety element needs to identify public safety risks and vulnerabilities and set policies and include some actions we can take to reduce those risks and make sure that we're prepared. There's a few new laws that have been adopted in recent years that require that we look at some specific things like changing risks from wildfires and new or exacerbated hazards and risks related to our changing climate. And so our public safety element update is going to include those things as well. And we are required whenever we update the housing element to also update the public safety element to address those things, which is why the public safety element is also part of phase 1. Finally, the other laws do tell us that when you update 2 or more elements of your general plan, you must also develop an environmental justice policies. So this is a relatively new requirement for general plans. This is new for Riverside, certainly, but we have a couple of options about how we do this. You can create a new element or a new chapter of your general plan that's specifically focused on environmental justice, or you can develop policies that are sort of woven throughout your general plan and all those other areas, because environmental justice, and we'll talk a little bit more later about what exactly that means, but it does touch on so many of those topic areas that that I was mentioning are contained within a general plan. And so that is the approach that we have taken. We've developed a number of policies that can be incorporated into every element of our general plan. And so we'll go through in more detail about what exactly that looks like in just a little bit. Next slide, please. So just for some background, the overall project timeline here is again being driven by the housing element update deadline. That's October 15th of this year. We kicked this project off in fall of 2020. And we spent, the first kind of the tail end of 2020 and the first part of 2021 really doing a lot of the background information gathering, data collection, and starting to prepare a community outreach plan. We had a series of public workshops in the first part of this year. We are having these additional workshops because we did hear from our community that people wanted additional opportunities to participate and to give feedback. So we'll be doing these 2 additional workshops that you guys are joining us for tonight, and again next week. We are simultaneously preparing an environmental impact report that's required by law. That's a big, long document. It takes a very long time to produce. We began that process in April, and that will run through August. Coming up in just about a month now, we're going to release a draft of that environmental impact report. and there will be a 45-day period where you can review it and make comments on it. This is all getting us to sort of the end of the road in late summer, early fall, when we'll have a couple of public hearings with our planning commission, and finally with our city council to have the whole project all together, including the housing element, the public safety element, the environmental justice policies, changes to zoning that are related to the housing element, the environmental impact report itself. The whole kit and caboodle will be considered as a single project by those two bodies for formal approval and adoption in August, September, and October. So stay tuned for those events. Next slide, please. So really quickly, just to introduce the team of folks that's helping us complete this project. We have a number of representatives of these folks on our call today who are going to be giving us a more detailed overview of both the environmental justice and the public safety pieces. We do have Houseo Levine Associates from Pasadena and Chicago, who are our lead consultants who are kind of overseeing most of the planning work and also kind of just being the sort of central hub that coordinates all of the various components of this project. We have Veronica Tam Associates. They're our housing element specialist. ICF, who you'll hear a lot more from tonight, they're our leads for the environmental review and our sustainability piece. They're specifically responsible for the update of the public safety element and the development of our environmental justice policies. So again, you'll hear more from those folks. Fair and Piers is our transportation consultant. Ariano Associates, who you've already met some of them, including JC, are leading the community outreach and engagement efforts that we're doing. And then finally, our legal consultants are Best and Krieger. Next slide, please. Okay, so as we mentioned previously, we are going to be launching some poll questions throughout. So we wanted to start off with a quick poll to both kind of demonstrate the polling feature and also get some information about who's participating in tonight's meeting. And then you will see there will be polls throughout the meeting. In fact, we're going to, as we present each policy, we're going to ask your opinion on that policy. So use this poll as kind of an opportunity to get familiar with how the polling feature works. And if you're not comfortable answering any of these questions or you don't feel like taking this poll, feel free to skip it if you like. But there are just a few questions in this poll. So we'll give you just a few minutes to take a look at that. Just another couple of minutes here. All right. A few more seconds on the poll. All right. So if we can have that poll wrapped up. Thank you. So that's just a little bit of a sample about how the polling works. Future questions will be slightly different. They'll ask, we're only going to ask 1 or 2 questions per policy. And with those, you'll be able to rate to offer your opinion. So we will see more of that in just a little bit. So at this time, we're going to transition to presenting some background about what the environmental justice piece of this project is and introducing our environmental justice policies. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Greta Brownlow with ICF. She is our lead on the environmental justice component of the project. So Greta, please take it away.
Great, thanks, Matthew. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Okay, so I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about providing some background, as Matthew said, on environmental justice. And, I'm going to talk a little bit about what this term means, kind of from a planning and regulatory perspective, why and how we're developing environmental justice policies and actions for the general plan update, and kind of how we're identifying the environmental justice communities within the city. So this slide kind of provides some definitions of environmental justice, and these are derived from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. So defining what environmental justice is and how we define environmental justice communities. As you can see on the slide, environmental justice is defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And then related to that, we also define environmental justice communities. So what are the populations or communities within the city that we define in this way? And again, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, these include areas that are disproportionately affected by environmental pollution and other hazards, concentrations of people that are low income, or in particular low income areas that are disproportionately affected by environmental pollution or other hazards. Next slide, please. So as Matthew explained, as part of the general plan update, the city is developing a series of environmental justice policies and implementing actions. This is a requirement of Senate Bill 1000, which was passed in 2016. So as Matthew noted, relatively recently. And it requires jurisdictions like cities and counties with disadvantaged communities or environmental justice communities to include these policies in their general plans when they're updating two or more elements or chapters of the general plan. And the policies, as Matthew explained, can either be included in a single environmental justice element or chapter of the plan, or they can be integrated within other elements, which is the option that the city is choosing. The policies and actions that we have developed, or I guess I should say drafted, because we're still, obviously in this format and in others, getting your feedback and opinions about the proposed policies. But thus far, we've identified some draft policies and actions by identifying environmental justice communities and demographics and conducting outreach so that the city can better understand kind of what some of the disproportionate challenges that are faced by these communities and how they're sort of unique to different communities within the city. Next, please. Thanks. So just a little bit about how we're actually identifying environmental justice communities within and around the city. So the primary tool that we're using to locate environmental justice communities is something called CalEnviroScreen, and that is a data tool that's developed by the California EPA. Again, the Environmental Protection Agency Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. And so you can see on this map the areas that are yellow, highlighted, and hashed. Those are areas identified in CalEnviroScreen. And what that basically means is this tool has about 20 indicators that help jurisdictions to identify areas that are challenged, are disadvantaged in terms of the exposure to various environmental pollutants and contaminants. And just an example of a few of those 20 indicators are things like air pollutant concentrations, asthma cases, cleanup sites, hazardous sites within the community, and poverty. And again, those are just examples of some of the indicators. And then the other area that you can see on here is brown kind of highlighted area. And those are areas that are defined per another bill, SB 535, which is meant to target the direction of funds for improving air pollution effects within certain communities. So again, these are just a couple of the tools, CalEnviroscreen being the primary tool to help us kind of identify where these communities are so that the city can appropriately develop policies and implementing actions to address some of the issues that these communities are facing. And with that, I believe I'm going to turn it back over to Matthew.
Yes, great. Thank you, Greta. Okay, so as we mentioned previously, we've taken the approach of developing policies that can be integrated into the other portion, the existing chapters or elements of our general plan. And so you see those listed here. We have developed policies, 1 or 2 each, for the land use and urban design, circulation and community mobility, education, noise, air quality, parks and recreation, public facilities and infrastructure, arts and culture, and historic preservation elements. Those are all individual elements or chapters of our general plan. I want to also mention a little bit about the relationship between policy and action. So the policies that you're going to see that we've developed are sort of the direction that we want to go in terms of what do we want to achieve as a city and as a community. The actions, which you will see some examples of actions, are the actual concrete steps that the city will commit to take in order to make that policy into a reality. So we're going to show you the policies that we have drafted and ask for your feedback on them. We're also going to show you some examples of what actions that fit under that policy might look like to help give you a better understanding of what kind of the concrete steps that that we might take to implement our policies could be. I also want to note that there are also environmental justice related policies that have been drafted as part of the public safety element update, which we will talk more about in just a little bit. And also in the housing element, the draft housing element update, which we are going to be discussing in much more detail at our workshop planned for next Thursday, June 17th. Next slide, please. Okay, so the way that this is going to work is we're going to present these policies to you. You see the first one here, give you some examples of the action items that may be related to them, and then we're going to ask you to rate this policy as to how well you think it serves your community and your city as it relates to the policy area that we're discussing. How effective do you think it will be? Do you think it is consistent with what you think the Riverside of the future should be? So our first policy, or I should say policies, there's 2 of them. The first one, and these are related to our land use and urban design element of our general plan. This policy states that the city, we will ensure new housing developments adhere to all the state, local, and federal requirements that apply to them to avoid disproportionate impacts on environmental justice communities. And so actions related to this item could look like some things like requiring special design features such as and technologies to be implemented in new development to minimize the impacts of noise and air quality and other concerns when those developments are located in our environmental justice communities. Another thing that another action might be locating new housing development that near to transportation and shopping and parks and schools and all the other services and amenities that people need in their daily lives in order to improve people's access to these things and to help improve affordability. So if we could have the poll, please. we want, so we would like you to take a minute to rate this policy as to how important or effective you think it is for Riverside on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being, or the least important, and 10 being the highest or the most important. And you have the policy itself restated right there, right at the top of that poll. So just take a second to rate this policy. All right, so just a couple more seconds to wrap that up. Okay, we'll go ahead and close that poll. Do we want to show the results, please?
Matthew, this
Yes.
poll includes the second environmental justice policy. If you wanted to click on that slide first and go over that before.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
I apologize. Thank you. Okay. I apologize for that, folks. Our second policy that we've developed under the land use and urban design element is to ensure that the citywide and community engagement policy, which is a policy that's currently under development through our neighborhood engagement team to provide a uniform approach to public engagement for all city projects, to ensure that that policy provides community members with opportunities to participate in decisions that affect their environment and their health. So this actions related to this could include, of course, adopting that community engagement policy. It's still a draft at this point in time, and also committing to providing translation services, including Spanish and American Sign Language at our public meetings. And so this is the second poll question in the poll that you have up. If you want to just take another moment to rate how important you think this policy is for us from 1 to 10. All right. Okay. We want to go ahead and close that poll now. Okay, it looks like we have 10 who thinks both of these, let's see, policy 1, it looks like 5 respondents find this one to be a 10 as extremely important, and 4 respondents rating that a 9, and then some other responses distributed between 3 and 7. And we have for the second policy, for the citywide and community engagement, we have 5 respondents who rated a 9 and 8 respondents who rated it a 10. So thanks for that feedback. All right, let's move on to the next element. All right, so the next 2 policies are going to be related to our circulation and community mobility element. This is the piece of our general plan that is related mainly to transportation and how we get around our cities. So the environmental justice policy we've developed for, the first environmental justice policy we've developed for this element is that we will promote physical activity and active transportation, that's walking, biking, and other means of getting around under human power, to address negative health outcomes, particularly among our environmental justice communities. So some actions that could be associated with this policy include comprehensively identifying any gaps in connections, like missing sidewalks and unsafe conditions that connect our neighborhoods to our recreational amenities and our parks and things like that. Another action could look like providing youth-based, affordable, or free programs that promote physical activity and nutrition. Next slide, please. The second policy that we have proposed for the circulation and community mobility elements includes encouraging increased public transportation and multimodal transportation choices as a means to reduce roadway congestion and associated air pollution and to promote overall health. So some of the actions that we could undertake to implement this policy include working to eliminate barriers to physical activity within our environmental justice communities, and creating safe drop-off and pickup zones around our walking routes to, I should say, to our schools in coordination with our school districts and other agencies. So with those two policies summarized up for you, can we please run the next poll? So just like last time, we're going to ask you to take a look at each of these two policies that we've developed, and please rate them from 1 to 10 on to how important and effective you think they are for your community, your neighborhood, and our city. And we'll let you take just a few minutes to complete that. All right, just a few more seconds on that. And while we wait, just so you know, the questions that are being submitted through our Q&A, we are making note of those and we will respond to those when we get to our Q&A section. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at these results. Okay, so the first policy about promoting physical activity and active transportation, we have a majority, or the highest number of respondents rated that or 4 folks rated that a 9 in terms of importance. And for our second, to promote public transportation and multimodal transportation, 7 respondents, or half of the participants, rated that a 10. So very good feedback. Thank you all. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the next element is the education element. And we have one policy that we've developed for environmental justice as it relates to education. Of course, the city works very closely with the public school districts and our local colleges and universities, as well as our charter and private schools. The city has less of an active role in regulating, education in terms of, school district priorities and curricula and things like that. But we do collaborate very closely with our school districts and our other educational institutions. So to that end, this policy that we've developed says that we will coordinate with our public school districts, charter and private K through 12 schools, and our local colleges and universities to promote equity in educational facilities and opportunities for the entire community. So some actions that could be related to this policy include developing a means to promote academic and skills training programs for students, particularly those in our environmental justice communities, and working with our education institutions to create joint use learning and information centers and community services when new school facilities are sited. So that's things like the opportunity to, in the siting of a new school location, create opportunities for additional recreational space for a neighborhood, things of that nature. So we will now run another poll to get your feedback on this policy. Okay, so same as last time, please rate this policy from 1 to 10, 1 being very not important at all, 10 being very important. We have just about 10 or 15 seconds for you to complete that. Okay, great. If we want to close that up and take a look at some results. Okay, 6 of our respondents rated that a 10, extremely important, and 4 other respondents rated that an 8 or a 9. And okay, great. Thanks again for that feedback. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So the next slide has to do with the noise element. Noise is an important factor in health and wellness, especially in urban environments, where noise related to transportation, oftentimes transportation activities, but other things as well can have an effect on people's overall health and well-being. So to that end, the policy that we've developed for the noise element for environmental justice is with a particular focus on our environmental justice communities, reduce noise pollution by enforcing noise reduction and control measures within and adjacent to our residential neighborhoods. So noise reduction and control measures could mean things like higher sound transmission rated windows and construction materials for development projects. Reducing noise pollution would have more to do with sources of noise. So actions to implement these items could include assessing and identifying which of our neighborhoods are subject to the most noise pollution, and creating standard construction measures that can be used to reduce interior noise levels, particularly for housing and affordable housing development. And so let's go ahead and run the poll to get a rating for this policy, please. All right, same as last time, please rate this from 1 to 10. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look at some results. Very good. Okay, so we have 4 of our participants rated this a 5, about the middle of the scale in terms of importance to implement this policy, and looks like we have a total of 9 who rated it anywhere from an 8 to a 10. So thanks again for that feedback. Okay. Great. Next, the next policy is related to the air quality element of our general plan. So obviously in the inland region, air quality is a particular concern. And so we do have an entire chapter of our general plan that's dedicated to managing healthy air quality to the extent that we can. So the environmental justice policy that we've developed for this element is to ensure that our land use decisions, including enforcement actions, are made in an equitable fashion to protect our residents and our workers and environmental justice communities from the short and long-term effects of air pollution. So some of the actions that could be related to this this policy could be creating construction requirements to minimize indoor and outdoor air pollution for new housing development when it's located in areas that are close to sources of pollution, or developing regulations to minimize air emissions or reduce their effects on our environmental justice communities, perhaps by regulating where the location of sources of emissions can be located in new ways. So let's please get the poll going so that we can get some feedback on this policy. Once again, please rate from 1 to 10 using the poll tool. Just a few more seconds here. Okay, let's go ahead and get some results up. Okay, looks like 11 of our participants rated this anywhere from an 8 to a 10 in terms of its importance and its effectiveness for us. So thanks again for that. All right, next slide, please. All right, so the next is related to the Parks and Recreation element of the general plan. Now, this is it's important to remember that this is separate from the Parks Master Plan, which is specific plans for development or improvement or maintenance of all of our city's parks, including the location of new parks. But the Parks Master Plan and the general plan do go hand in hand in that the city's long-term growth and development is very dependent on the availability and our ability to maintain and expand our park system. So with that, the environmental justice policy we've developed for this element is to distribute our recreational facilities equitably throughout all of our neighborhoods. And so some actions that could be implemented or used to implement that policy would be looking at ways that we can transform underused city-owned land into usable public spaces, and potentially prioritizing the development or improvement of parks and recreational spaces that are located in our environmental justice communities. So with that, let's go ahead and get the poll going for the rating of this policy. Okay. Let's go ahead and get our results. Okay, pretty even distribution of respondents. Thinking this is on the higher end of important, anywhere from 7 to 9, with a majority or 6 of our participants calling this policy very important. Thank you again. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next element is our public facilities and infrastructure element, and the environmental justice policy that we've developed for this. So public facilities and infrastructure covers a broad range of things, but the policy that we've developed for this element is related to our healthcare facilities, specifically coordinating with our healthcare providers to expand healthcare access for residents in our environmental justice communities. So some actions that we could take to implement this policy include working to promote access to both affordable and culturally competent healthcare and medical services in our EJ communities, and also expanding our energy efficiency and conservation programs and incentives for energy conservation retrofits and things of that nature. So let's go ahead and rate this policy, please. And again, just like last time, please rate 1 to 10. All right, just a couple more seconds here. Okay, let's take a look at our results. Okay, we've got 8 participants rated this a 9 or a 10. So thanks again for this input. Next, let's take a look at the next slide, please. Okay, we've got, next up is our arts and culture element. Riverside does call itself the city of arts and innovation. So arts and culture does have its own dedicated chapter of the general plan. So an environmental justice policy that we've drafted to incorporate into that element would be to promote the equitable distribution of arts and cultural facilities across the city. Some specific actions or steps that we could take related to this policy include developing an action plan for how we can incorporate more public art within our environmental justice communities, and doing what we can to support formal arts programming in our schools. So let's go ahead and go ahead and rate this policy here. And once again, 1 to 10. Just a couple more seconds. Okay, let's take a look at the results, please. All right, we've got 5 respondents rated this a 10, and an additional 5 respondents rated this at 8 or 9. Okay, thanks again for that. And finally, moving on to our final environmental justice policies, and on the next slide here, our historic preservation element. So the historic preservation environmental justice policy we've developed would involve encouraging identification and preservation of historic or cultural resources that are associated with communities whose histories and historical contributions in the cities are not well documented. So some actions that we might take to implement this would be pursuing historic designations for sites that are associated with underrepresented communities, and potentially looking at establishing points of cultural interest within our that are reflective of our underrepresented communities or our some of the various civil rights movements that have had important chapters here in Riverside. So let's go ahead and give this policy a rating, please. Okay. Once again, we'll do it 1 to 10. And just a few more seconds for you to complete that. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at those results. Okay, we have 53% of our respondents, or 8 folks that find this to be extremely important, and an additional 5 that rated it above a 7. So thank you again for that. So, okay, that brings us to the end of the environmental justice policies that we've developed for the various elements of the general plan, with the exception of housing, which we'll talk about at our workshop next week, and public safety, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Thanks for participating in that polling. We are trying to get a sense of where people are at in terms of the policies that we've developed. So, we run this poll in this meeting. We are going to be releasing an almost identical survey with the same types of questions, although with an opportunity to provide written feedback in addition to just rating, that we will be sharing for the environmental justice policies and for our public safety policies as well. We want to make sure that we give everybody an opportunity to get some feedback and some input on these policies. So with that, we can now move into our Q&A or our open discussion piece. So we have some guiding questions that we have put up for you here to kind of spark some conversation. Primarily, we're asking, what have we missed? Should any of the policies that we looked at be omitted or deleted? How well do the proposed policies address the environmental justice concerns in your community as you know them? And then a third question would be, if you have specific actions or action items that we might implement or use to implement some of these policies, we would love to hear about them from you. So with that, we're going to open it up. So if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. We will call on you and give you the opportunity to unmute your mic and ask your question. We'll also talk about some of the Q&A questions that have been received so far. So we've got a couple of questions, and one of our panelists has responded to a few of these, but I did want to make sure that we get an opportunity to address them in the Q&A. So our very first comments from Patrick, and he says, in the broadest sense, our EJ policy is okay, but without site-specific details and locations, it's hard to have an informed opinion. With that, we recognize that the policies can probably read a little broad. That's intentional. We want them to be, allow a broad range of implementing actions to achieve that particular direction. I think the actions that we develop to implement these policies are where that kind of level of specificity that you mentioned can come in. If you have thoughts or additional comments about how we might be able to do that through our implementing actions, we'd love to hear from you. Let's see, Kyle asks, will the community and mobility element, circulation and community mobility element involve prioritizing pedestrian and mass transit over car traffic? So it can. The community circulation and community mobility element, a comprehensive update to that element will be a big part of phase 2. Right now we are in phase 1, so we're looking at how we can incorporate some environmental justice policies into that element. But in terms of taking a really comprehensive and broad look at what that portion of our general plan looks like and how we might start to do some of those things that you mentioned is going to be a big piece of our phase 2 update, which again is kind of the follow-on to this initial phase where we're looking at housing, environmental justice, and public safety. Okay, Jason asks, won't just about all of the action items you've listed raise the cost of housing? So I might ask if you don't mind, if you would elaborate on that question. I think it probably relates to the things like construction standards. But if you want to elaborate on that, we'd be happy to hear from you. So Jason has his hand raised. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, I think you should be able to do that at this point.
Yeah, hi there, Jason Hunter, Ward 1. Thank you, Matthew. So I kind of joined in. I missed the first maybe 20 minutes of the presentation, but the point that I jumped in was when you were talking about construction standards. And I think there had been 2 or 3 slides in a row, and I didn't memorize them. But when I was looking at them, what I noticed was, one of the big things you hear out of the building and development community is that it costs a lot of money to develop and build in California. And so when I see a lot more regulations and standards, I'm not saying they're bad in of themselves, but when I see, making it even tougher to build profitably, and builders are going to have to make a profit in order to survive. When I see a lot of the stuff saying we're going to make it even more stringent and more difficult to do this stuff, it's just going to raise the average cost of housing for everybody in California. So I don't know how you accomplish some of that stuff without it being counterproductive. That's it.
Sure. The point is well taken. You're not wrong. I think the effect may be lessened somewhat by the way that we approach it. I mean, if we do things for instance, if we do something like for noise control, we develop a sort of standard construction drawings for improved sound transmission control that people can use, like when you're doing a home addition or you're for sort of the smaller projects. Hopefully that might have the effect of saving people potentially the expense of having to consult with professionals to develop that kind of thing. So, I think it's all in the way that those things are implemented. So that the point is well taken. So thanks for that comment. Okay, Duffy asks, how would any parcels available for actual park development survive the fervent efforts to rezone all available lots for high density housing? So a couple of things here. One is that any sites that are identified in our Parks Master Plan currently as future park sites that are maybe undeveloped, we are not looking at zoning those for housing. We can't. If we were to do so, we would need to identify suitable replacement parkland somewhere else. And so even if we were to do that, which we were not, the effect would be that we would have to, again, identify some level of replacement. But we also could be looking at things like maybe there are sites that are, not suitable for development for this or that reason, be it their terrain or their size and shape, things like that. That perhaps could lend themselves quite well to other types of recreational or public uses. So again, the general plan is not the Parks Master Plan, but the general plan and the Parks Master Plan do work together kind of in concert to help to coordinate, our land use development and the physical growth of the city and the planning and maintenance and upkeep that we're doing to our park system. Kyle asks, would historical preservation include anti-gentrification efforts? If you don't mind, Kyle, I might ask if you wouldn't mind elaborating a little bit on that question. If not, that's okay. Okay, your hand's up, so feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead.
All right. Oh, that'll work. I'm mostly I'm thinking in terms of a lot of these communities have been around for a long period of time, and the sort of gentrification of those areas tends to destroy those historical communities.
Okay. Do you when you say gentrification, do you mean increase in cost or land value or new development?
Usually it's driving out the current residents through increasing land costs, rent increases, buying out yeah.
Okay, I follow you. Greta, do you have any thoughts on how we can try to balance historic preservation with the need to maintain the ability for people to be secure in their communities, and what kinds of things might we do to ensure that that balance doesn't get too far out of order one way or another?
Yeah, I mean, so I think when we're talking about historic preservation, it's a little bit more about the built environment, and I could see where you might be, like, if you're improving or preserving, rehabilitating those structures or those areas, you might be driving up land values, and that could be a factor. But typically, where we would deal with anti-gentrification policies and actions would be kind of more in like the housing element, I would think. Although I can definitely see the connection, but I feel like that would be the more kind of appropriate place to talk about, and the policy would be related to sort of anti-displacement and ensuring ways for folks to be able to remain in their homes and their neighborhoods and not be displaced by some of these improvement efforts. And I think that's a super important question, and great to be thinking about it from different angles, especially when we're talking about, again, improving structures, historic districts. But yeah.
Great, thank you, Greta. All right, so our next question is from Duffy, and the question is, what policies protect the interests of long-term residents that have invested lives, raised families, and have their major asset here, that being their home, It seems as if the city is bending over backwards for people that may eventually live here at the expense of the folks that do live here. Okay, so it seems a little bit more of a comment, but in terms of what policies, I think the environmental justice policies that we're looking at are specifically looking at our established communities that are known to have environmental justice issues. So I think I might disagree a little bit about these policies not being designed to serve people who are already in place. A lot of these are intended to improve health wellness outcomes, reduce pollution burden on our existing established communities. So I don't know if anyone else from the city team has a comment or wants to expand any on that. Maybe, I don't know, Mary, if you have any thoughts about that as well.
So Matthew, I think the only thing that I would say is that as part of the housing element and as part of the public safety element and environmental justice policies that we're developing, what we're looking to do is to create an inclusive community. We understand that there are a lot of neighborhoods and areas with established homes, with established neighborhoods. And what we've done is we've really tried to look at those available lands within those neighborhoods to try to supplement and augment those neighborhoods because they're close to services, they're close to amenities. And that really is how we are really looking at putting our policies in place. So I think that we are protecting the current residents as well as those that will live here, understanding that no one was the last one into the city and that we will have people moving into our city. So how do we create the best neighborhoods for existing residents and for those who will move?
All right, thank you, Mary. Okay, so that's it for the Q&A questions. Are there any other hands or anybody else that would like to make a comment quickly before we move on to public safety? All right. So, and again, if anything comes to you while we move forward through the public safety piece of this, feel free to throw that in the Q&A box, and we will come back to it at our final Q&A session after we hear from Robert Lanza with ICF, who is going to introduce us to the public safety element, give us some background, and talk to us about what that means. So, Robert, please take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert Lanza. I work for ICF. I am the task lead for developing the revised public safety element. Public safety element is a component of the general plan. And as Matthew mentioned, once we start updating the housing element, we also have to update the public safety element. And there's certain things that we need to do in the public safety element as an update with respect to the various statutes. We need to update seismic hazards, fire hazards. We need to incorporate climate adaptation and resiliency. And of course, we need to add the environmental justice elements that we already talked about. The public safety element preparation is to ensure that the city takes actions to respond to and prepare for natural hazards and human-caused hazards throughout the city, and respond to safety threats, and also enable the city to be better prepared for various types of hazards that may occur. To that effect, if anyone is familiar with the previous version of the public safety element, a few additions have been made. We added drought as a specific sub-element under natural hazards because of the conditions that California has been experiencing in general, and Riverside County in particular. We also, as we said, added climate adaptation and resiliency in response to specific directions from statutes. We also added a pandemic sub-element in public health and safety, The city has already developed pandemic preparedness and response programs, and those have been incorporated as part of the public safety element. Next slide, please. These are the policies that are included as part of the public safety element. Natural hazards include seismic hazards, wildfire and urban fire hazards, flood hazards, and drought. Hazardous materials includes hazardous materials management and hazardous materials transportation. Transportation as a public safety element, which is different from circulation, which is a separate part of the general plan. Public safety transportation has to do with aircraft hazards, operations and land use around airports. It has to do with railroad hazards, hazards that have to do with railroad crossings, pedestrian and bicycle safety, and vehicle safety. Emergency services includes police and fire services, public safety, emergency preparedness, and emergency response. Pandemic, again, we added that to the public safety element for this particular update. That includes pandemic preparedness, response, and public outreach. Homelessness is also an element of public safety, and that includes various programs under homelessness solutions, and we'll talk about those as we go through the various policies. And again, climate change and resiliency is also part of the public safety element, and that has to do with climate adaptation, climate resiliency, and also greenhouse gas emissions. The guiding principle that we talked about has an overarching focus on all of these policies, and each one of these policies has a series of action items for which we will provide a few examples. There are actually 5, 6 action items for each one of these elements, so we'll go through a few of them, and we'll go to the next slide. Public safety element includes maps that outline where the natural hazards are. And these have to do with various sub-elements under natural hazards. This slide illustrates regional fault zones for seismic hazards. And the purpose of these maps, and there's a few more of them to come, the purpose of these maps is to allow an overlay of where the housing opportunity zones are and where the hazard zones are, to do an analysis of where those overlaps occur. The opportunity zones were developed to avoid hazard zones, but that's not perfect. There are some overlaps, and we'll show those as we go along. Next slide, please. This is also a slide that illustrates seismic hazards. This is the soil liquefaction zones, and this illustrates where in the event of a seismic event, soil liquefaction can occur, and that has to do with potential structural damage to the housing. So we use that as part of the analysis also in terms of looking at the overlay of the opportunity areas. Next slide, please. And this slide illustrates fire hazard areas, and these are the state identified high, very high, and moderate fire areas. Again, these are to allow analysis of where the opportunity areas are and where the fire hazard areas are. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates flood hazard areas. This includes flood zones, includes the Santa Ana River. It includes floodways and also dam inundation areas. Any place that can be affected by high water is part of this particular slide. And again, we use this slide in the public safety analysis. Next slide, please. This slide and the next slide have to do with the assessment of airport land use zones. There's certain areas identified around the airports that have specific land use characteristics and land use restrictions. And these are identified in this slide for Riverside and next slide for the Air Force Base. Next slide, please. This is the airport land use zones for the Air Force Base. And next and final map slide. This slide, and you'll get a bigger picture of this when the actual public safety element appears. This is a slide that overlays the hazard zones that we just illustrated and the opportunity areas that are identified as part of the housing element. This is a way of illustrating where the overlaps are. And part of the purpose of doing this overlay is to indicate areas in which mitigation may be needed. And this will be reflected in the public safety element and in the action items and the implementation plan. Next slide, please. And this is the slide that I turn it back over to Matthew, and Matthew continues to explain what a guiding principle is.
All right, thanks, Robert. Okay, so as you see from the last map that Robert showed us, there are hazards of all kinds everywhere. They are a fact of life, and we can't necessarily avoid all of them all the time. So an important piece of the public safety element is making sure that we have policies in place to reduce risks from those hazards to the maximum extent feasible wherever we can and however we can. One thing that we've developed for the public safety element, we've also developed a guiding principle for the housing element, which we'll talk about next week. But we have developed an overall guiding principle, which is sort of the top level statement of what this element is intended to do and what we want to achieve with it. So the guiding principle that we've developed here, of course, is comprehensively address the public safety needs and concerns of Riverside residents, businesses, institutions, and visitors in a proactive and a coordinated way to ensure protection from foreseeable natural and human-caused hazards. And again, that's that proactive and coordinated approach is so important because, as we just saw, there is virtually no areas where there is not some level of hazard, be it natural or human cause, in the city. So with that, we'll jump into the draft public safety policies. There are 7 of them. We'll tear through them relatively quickly here. And we'll also touch briefly on some potential implementing actions. So the first policy is related to natural hazards. And as Robert mentioned, he's covered a wide range of natural hazards, including floods, seismicity, wildfire, things like that. But in general, our policy is to reduce the risk to the community from hazards related to geologic conditions, seismic activity, flooding, drought, and structural and wildland fires. Action items that could be related to this policy include education and outreach campaigns and updating and maintaining our maps and plans in preparing for and responding to these things. So just like last time, we are going to quickly run a poll and let you give you an opportunity to tell us what you think about this policy. Go ahead and bring that up, please. Okay, same as the environmental justice section, please rate how effective and important you think this policy is for us and for our city on a scale of 1 to 10. And we'll take just a few seconds to run that poll. Okay, go ahead and let's take a look at the results. And again, I will add that we are going to be adding this on a web-based survey as well for folks who did not have an opportunity to join us tonight to provide their input on these policies as well. As I suspected, pretty highly rated in terms of importance for being prepared to respond to natural hazards. So thank you again for that feedback. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so our next policy area has to do with hazardous materials. So our policy is pretty broad, again, to minimize the risk of potential hazards associated with management and transport of hazardous materials. And some of the action items related to this include creating preparedness and training programs for responding to hazardous materials incidents and designating safe transport routes throughout the city for the transport of these materials. So if we can take a quick moment to poll your opinion on how important this policy is for you, for your neighborhood and the city. So just a few seconds to respond to that poll here. And we should be good to move on to responses. Okay, looks like a majority of our respondents think this one is extremely important as well. Thanks again. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so our policies is for transportation as it relates to safety. So we're looking to minimize the risk of potential hazards associated with air and ground transportation. So the action items that we have for this include coordinating with our railroad operators to improve our grade crossings, including for quiet zone readiness, and improving the safety at those grade crossings where they interact with pedestrians and bicycles, to make sure that our ground transportation system, including our railways, are not creating additional safety hazards for the city. So let's go ahead and rate this policy, please. All right. Okay. Let's take a look at the results for that, please. Okay, we've got some 6s, some 8s, and the majority is a 9. All right. Thanks again, everybody. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. Okay, so this policy has to do with emergency services, the provision of our emergency services, and our policy, our draft policy is that we will provide high quality and responsive police, fire, and emergency services to all residents and businesses in the city. Actions to implement this include identifying a location for a new police headquarters that's been planned for quite some time, conducting disaster preparedness activities and emergency response exercises, and coordinating our police services with our college and university campuses. So if we can take just a moment to bring up the poll and rate this policy, please. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at those results, please. Okay, we have a tie between moderate importance and high importance. Great, thank you for that. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide, please. Okay, so this has to do with response to our current and potential future pandemics. So in order to address this hazard, our policy would be to provide high quality and responsive public health services to all residents. Actions to implement this policy could include our vetting and evaluating on a regular basis our pandemic preparedness and response plans, developing outreach programs to communicate with folks and give health updates, and identifying best practices to protect our community from illness. So if we could take a moment and rate this policy, please. All right, just a couple of seconds to get responses in. And very good, let's go ahead and take a look at results. Okay, and a large majority would rate this one a 10. I'm sure this is top of mind for folks, given the year that we have had. So let's go ahead and thanks again for that. Let's go ahead and move on to the policy number 6. This is related to homelessness. So our policy for public safety as it relates to homelessness is to work to reduce homelessness in Riverside through coordinated implementation and equitable accessibility to public safety, economic, and social programs for these populations. So actions to implement that could include coordinating with nonprofits to provide access to transitional housing and other services, and implementing a regional Santa Ana River Bottom encampment response plan that's been under development for some time. So if we could take a moment again to rate this policy 1 to 10, please. We'll give just about 10 seconds here to get those responses in. All right, thanks folks for voting. Let's go ahead and take a look at those results. All right, 78% of our respondents consider this to be an extremely important policy. So thank you again for that. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the final public safety policy. This is related to climate adaptation and resiliency. So our policy will be to identify key potential impacts of climate change on the city's organizations, infrastructure, natural resources, and residents, and develop adaptation and resiliency, there's a word missing here, I apologize, strategies to address those issues. So this could include preparing a vulnerability assessment to identify where our weak points are as it relates to our changing climate and where people are at most risk, developing a climate action and adaptation plan, and incorporating resiliency principles into all of our city practices and procedures. Final poll, let's go ahead and rate this policy, please. And once again, if you want to share these with people who were not able to join us tonight to give feedback on these policies, we will be releasing surveys that are almost exactly like the rating polls that we've run tonight, so that you can share them with whomever you like, and we will send them to all of our workshop participants and many others as well. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the results here. Okay, so we have just a little under half a plurality of our respondents rate this policy a 9 out of 10. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and move on to our Q&A for our public safety element policies. So again, this is an open discussion format. I don't see anything new in the Q&A, so we will open up this discussion to participants who want to raise their hands and speak if you have verbal questions. Again, we're looking for your thoughts on anything that we've missed, anything that you don't think needs to be included, your thoughts on how well you think these address our public safety concerns or the public safety concerns that you have in your community. And if you have specific thoughts about actions that we could take to implement any of these policies, we would love to hear about those from you. We have Kyle has his hand raised. So go ahead, Kyle, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes. For the emergency response section, relying on our violence workers as a primary response tends to make our communities less safe and especially impact our marginalized communities in terms of safety.
Okay, so a comment there. Okay, if you, I'd encourage you to maybe think about some action items that we might be able to develop that would address that concern for you. We'd be happy to look at how they might be incorporated. I do want to point out, and I apologize, I should point out, I should have pointed out earlier actually that again, the general plan policies, the general plan is mainly related to the physical growth and development of the city. So what the general plan is not an operations or a strategic plan for a specific city department or agency. As I mentioned kind of previously with the Parks Master Plan, those documents work together, but the general plan is not intended to be, the single unifying document for all of our city activities, but they are all interrelated. So again, thanks, Kyle, for that comment. I don't see any other hands raised. Do we have any other comments that anyone would like to make at this point related to our public safety element? Again, we have a broad range of topic areas, everything from our natural hazards related to earthquakes and fires and floods to human-caused hazards related to toxic substances and contamination, and the provision of public services in terms of emergency response. What we will be doing is using the feedback that we receive from this workshop, from all of our other stakeholders who are providing feedback on these policies, and also our internal city departments, the folks who are responsible for carrying these things out on a day-to-day basis, to develop specific actions that we will incorporate under each of these broad policy areas to make sure that we're adequately addressing everything that's covered in our public safety element.
Matthew, this is Robert. I wanted to point out a couple of things relating to the previous comment. In the public safety element, and specifically under public services, the police department strategic plan is an action item in terms of maintaining and updating that plan in our draft action items. That also is true for the fire department and other city departments that have to do with public safety and emergency response. Draft action items include maintaining and updating the department's strategic plan. So that's another avenue for addressing department activities.
Great, thank you, Robert. Okay, I don't see any other hands yet, so just to give folks a preview, one of the things that we're going to be doing is, as we mentioned, we have developed a draft of the public safety element itself. It's a much longer document that covers all of the issues that we've established, or that we've touched on tonight, including each individual policy and all of the related action items for those things. So when we've completed our kind of internal review of that first draft, we're going to put that out there for you to take a look at, anybody, in fact, to take a look at and comment on. So this is just the beginning and not the end of the input opportunities for the public safety element. Okay, so I guess I will ask for a final call for any hands for anyone who would like to ask a question, make a comment, provide any kind of thoughts on the public safety policies. All right, if not, let's take a quick peek at the next slide. So again, we're just want to recap for you what the opportunities are for you to stay in touch, to receive updates, and to continually participate and provide input on our project. So the policy feedback tool we've been discussing, there is one live on the project website now. We'll be expanding that in the coming days to add opportunities to give input on our public safety and our environmental justice policies, as we've covered tonight. Again, as always, you can contact me directly. I am the point person for you at the city for this project, any part of it. So if you have any questions, anything comes up, you want to talk to me directly, you have ideas, you have concerns, please feel free to reach out to me. And we would encourage everyone to join us next week for our a similar discussion that we will have focused on our draft housing element update and the policies that are related to that. So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you to our panelists, including our consulting team and our city folks who were here to help us out all night tonight. I wish all of you a very pleasant evening and hope to see you again soon. Thank you all for joining us.